What's up, folks? I'm Dan, and welcome to I've Been Meaning to Read That, the show where I read books out loud that I've been meaning to read. Let's go. I deeply apologize for the lateness of this episode, people. Deeply apologize. But I have had the worst allergies every time the seasons change, man. Same old story. And because of those allergies, I lost my voice this week. Compound allergies and losing your voice with having to scream at horrible little beastly children all day, and, well, this is what you get. I've only recently regained my voice, and now I'm here. I'm ready to record, incredibly, unbelievably, episode 50 of I've Been Meaning to Read That. That's wild to me, folks. I started this podcast at the beginning of the year, January, with a dream and a PDF on a shoestring budget, and here we are 50 episodes later. I've learned about recording and editing and really not much else, but we're nearly 85% of the way through the Count of Monte Cristo, and I am extremely excited. To those of you who've been with me from the very beginning, which according to Spotify analytics is, I think, nobody. Thank you. You mean everything to me. All right, let's get into the story. Volume 5, Chapter 96, The Contract. 3 days after the scene we have just described, namely towards 5 o'clock in the afternoon of the day fixed for the signature of the contract between Mademoiselle Eugenie Danglars and Andrea Cavalcanti, whom the banker persisted in calling Prince, a fresh breeze was stirring in the leaves in the little garden in front of the Count of Monte Cristo's house, and the Count was preparing to go out. While his horses were impatiently pawing the ground, held in by the coachman, who had been seated a quarter of an hour on his box, the elegant phaeton with which we are familiar rapidly turned the angle of the entrance gate and cast out on the doorsteps Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti, as decked up and gay as if he were going to marry a princess. He inquired after the Count with his usual familiarity, and, ascending lightly to the first story, met him at the top of the stairs. The Count stopped on seeing the young man. As for Andrea, he was launched, and when he was once launched, nothing stopped him. "Ah, good morning, my dear Count," said he. "Ah, Monsieur Andrea," said the latter, with his half-jesting tone. "How do you do?" "Charmingly, as you see. I am come to talk to you about 1,000 things, but first tell me, were you going out or just returned?" "I was going out, sir." "Then, in order not to hinder you, I will get up with you, if you please, in your carriage, and Tom shall follow with my phaeton in tow." "No," said the Count, with an imperceptible smile of contempt, for he had no wish to be seen in the young man's society. "No, I prefer listening to you here, my dear Monsieur Andrea. We can chat better indoors, and there is no coachman to overhear our conversation." The Count returned to a small drawing room on the first floor, sat down, and crossing his legs, motioned to the young man to take his seat also. Andrea assumed his gayest manner. "You know, my dear Count," said he, "the ceremony is to take place this evening. At 9 o'clock, the contract is to be signed at my father-in-law's." "Ah, indeed," said Monte Cristo. "What? Is it news to you? Has not Monsieur Danglars informed you of the ceremony?" "Oh, yes," said the Count. "I received a letter from him yesterday, but I do not think the hour was mentioned." "Possibly my father-in-law trusted to its general notoriety." "Well," said Monte Cristo, "you are fortunate, Monsieur Cavalcanti. It is a most suitable alliance you are contracting, and Mademoiselle Danglars is a handsome girl." "Yes, indeed she is," replied Cavalcanti in a very modest tone. "Above all, she is very rich. At least, I believe so," said Monte Cristo. "Very rich, do you think?" replied the young man. "Doubtless. It is said Monsieur Danglars conceals at least half his fortune." "And he acknowledges 15 or 20 million," said Andrea with a look sparkling with joy. "Without reckoning," added Monte Cristo, that he is on the eve of entering into a sort of speculation already in vogue in the United States and in England, but Quite novel in France. Yes, yes, I know what you mean. The railway, of which he has obtained the grant, is it not? Precisely. It is generally believed he will gain 10 million by that affair. 10 million? Do you think so? It is magnificent, said Cavalcanti, who was quite confounded at the metallic sound of these golden words. Without reckoning, replied Monte Cristo, that all his fortune will come to you, and justly, too, since Mademoiselle Danglars is an only daughter. Besides, your own fortune, as your father assured me, is almost equal to that of your betrothed. But enough of money matters. Do you know, Monsieur Andrea, I think you have managed this affair rather skillfully? Not badly, by any means, said the young man. I was born to be a diplomat. Well, you must become a diplomat. Diplomacy, you know, is something that is not to be acquired. It is instinctive. Have you lost your heart? Indeed, I fear it, replied Andrea, in the tone in which he had heard Durante or Valere reply to Alceste at the Theatre Francais. Is your love returned? I suppose so, said Andrea with a triumphant smile, since I am accepted. But I must not forget one grand point. Which? That I have been singularly assisted. Nonsense. Indeed, I have. By circumstances? No, by you. By me? Not at all, Prince, said Monte Cristo, laying a marked stress on the title. What have I done for you? Are not your name, your social position, and your merit sufficient? No, said Andrea. No, it is useless for you to say so, Count. I maintain that the position of a man like you has done more than my name, my social position, and my merit. You are completely mistaken, sir, said Monte Cristo coldly, who felt the perfidious maneuver of the young man and understood the bearing of his words. You only acquired my protection after the influence and fortune of your father had been ascertained. For, after all, who procured for me, who had never seen either you or your illustrious father, the pleasure of your acquaintance? Two of my good friends, Lord Wilmore and the Abbé Busoni. What encouraged me not to become your surety, but to patronize you? Your father's name, so well known in Italy and so highly honored. Personally, I do not know you. This calm tone and perfect ease made Andrea feel that he was, for the moment, restrained by a more muscular hand than his own, and that the restraint could not be easily broken through. Oh, then my father has really a very large fortune, Count. It appears so, sir, replied Monte Cristo. Do you know if the marriage settlement he promised me has come? I have been advised of it. But the 3 millions? The 3 millions are probably on the road. Then I shall really have them? Oh, well, said the Count, I do not think you have yet known the want of money. Andrea was so surprised that he pondered the matter for a moment. Then, arousing from his reverie, Now, sir, I have one request to make to you, which you will understand, even if it should be disagreeable to you. Proceed, said Monte Cristo. I have formed an acquaintance, thanks to my good fortune, with many noted persons, and have, at least for the moment, a crowd of friends. But marrying, as I am about to do before all Paris, I ought to be supported by an illustrious name, and in the absence of the paternal hand, some powerful one ought to lead me to the altar. Now, my father is not coming to Paris, is he? He is old, covered with wounds, and suffers dreadfully, he says, in traveling. I understand. Well, I am come to ask a favor of you. Of me? Yes, of you. And pray, what may it be? Well, to take his part. Oh, my dear sir, what? After the varied relations I have had the happiness to sustain towards you, can it be that you know me so little as to ask such a thing? Ask me to lend you 500,000, and, although such a loan is somewhat rare, on my honor, you would annoy me less. Know, then, what I thought I had already told you, that in participation in this world's affairs, more especially in their moral aspects, the Count of Monte Cristo has never ceased to entertain the scruples and even the superstitions of the East. I, who have a seraglio at Cairo, one at Smyrna, and one at Constantinople, preside at a wedding? Never. Then, you will refuse me? Decidedly. And were you my son or my brother, I would refuse you in the same way. But what must be done? Said Andrea, disappointed. You said just now that you had 100 friends. Very true, but you introduced me at Monsieur Danglars. Not at all. Let us recall the exact facts. You met him at a dinner party at my house, and you introduced yourself at his house. That is a totally different affair. Yes, but by my marriage you have forwarded that. I? Not in the least, I beg you to believe. Recollect what I told you when you asked me to propose you. Oh, I never make matches, my dear prince. It is my settled principle. Andrea bit his lips. But at least you will be there? Will all Paris be there? Oh, certainly. Well, like all Paris, I shall be there too. And will you sign the contract? I see no objection to that. My scruples do not go thus far. Well, since you will grant me no more, I must be content with what you give me. But one word more, Count. What is it? Advice. Be careful. Advice is worse than a service. Oh, you cannot give me this without compromising yourself. Tell me what it is. Is my wife's fortune 500,000 livres? That is the sum Monsieur Danglars himself announced. Must I receive it, or leave it in the hands of a notary? This is the way such affairs are generally arranged when it is wished to do them stylishly. Your two solicitors appoint a meeting, when the contract is signed, for the next or the following day. Then they exchange the two portions, for which they each give a receipt. Then, when the marriage is celebrated, they place the amount at your disposal as the chief member of the alliance. Because, said Andrea, with a certain ill-concealed uneasiness, I thought I heard my father-in-law say that he intended embarking our property in that a famous railway affair of which you spoke just now. Well, replied Monte Cristo, it will be the way, everybody says, of trebling your fortune in 12 months. Baron Danglars is a good father and knows how to calculate. In that the case, said Andrea, everything is all right, excepting your refusal, which quite grieves me. You must attribute it only to natural scruples under similar circumstances. Well, said Andrea, let it be as you wish. This evening, then, at 9 o'clock. Adieu, until then. Notwithstanding a slight resistance on the part of Monte Cristo, whose lips turned pale, but who preserved his ceremonious smile, Andrea seized the Count's hand, pressed it, jumped into his phaeton, and disappeared. The 4 or 5 remaining hours before 9 o'clock arrived, Andrea employed in writing, paying visits, designed to induce those of whom he had spoken to appear at the bankers in their gayest equipages, dazzling them by promises of shares in schemes which have since turned every brain, and in which Danglars was just taking the initiative. In fact, at 8:30 in the evening, the grand salon, the gallery adjoining, and the 3 other drawing rooms on the same floor were filled with a perfumed crowd, who sympathized but little in the event, but who all participated in that love of being present wherever there is anything fresh to be seen. An academician would say that the entertainments of the fashionable world are collections of flowers which attract inconstant butterflies, famished bees, and buzzing drones. No one could deny that the rooms were splendidly illuminated. The light streamed forth on the gilt moldings and the silk hangings, and all the bad taste of decorations, which had only their richness to boast of, shone in its splendor. Mademoiselle Eugenie was dressed with elegant simplicity in a figured white silk dress, and a white half-rose concealed in her jet-black hair was her only ornament, unaccompanied by a single jewel. Her eyes, however, betrayed that perfect confidence which contradicted the girlish simplicity of this modest attire. Madame Danglars was chatting at a short distance with Debray, Beauchamp, and Chateau Renaud. Debray was admitted to the house for this grand ceremony, but on the same plane with everyone else, and without any particular privileges. Monsieur Danglars, surrounded by deputies and men connected with the revenue, was explaining a new theory of taxation which he intended to adopt when the course of events had compelled the government to call him into the ministry. Andrea, on whose arm hung one of the most consummate dandies of the opera, was explaining to him rather cleverly, since he was obliged to be bold to appear at ease, his future projects and the new luxuries he meant to introduce to Parisian fashions with his 175,000 livres per annum. The crowd moved to and fro in the rooms like an ebb and flow of turquoise, rubies, emeralds, opals, and diamonds. As usual, the oldest women were the most decorated, and the ugliest the most conspicuous. If there was a beautiful lily or a sweet rose, you had to search for it, concealed in some corner behind a mother with a turban or an ant with a bird of paradise. At each moment, in the midst of the crowd, the buzzing and the laughter, the doorkeeper's voice was heard announcing some name well known in the financial department, respected in the army, or illustrious in the literary world, and which was acknowledged by a slight movement in the different groups. But for one whose privilege it was to agitate that ocean of human waves, how many were received with a look of indifference or a sneer of disdain? At the moment when the hand of the massive timepiece, representing Endymion asleep, pointed to 9 on its golden face, and the hammer, the faithful type of mechanical thought, struck 9 times, the name of the Count of Monte Cristo resounded in its turn, and, as if by an electric shock, all the assembly turned towards the door. The Count was dressed in black, and with his habitual simplicity. His white waistcoat displayed his expansive, noble chest, and his black stock was singularly noticeable because of its contrast with the deadly paleness of his face. His only jewelry was a chain, so fine that the slender gold thread was scarcely perceptible on his white waistcoat. A circle was immediately formed around the door. The Count perceived at one glance Madame Danglars at one end of the drawing-room, Monsieur Danglars at the other, and Eugenie in front of him. He first advanced towards the Baroness, who was chatting with Madame de Villefort, who had come alone, Valentine being still an invalid, and without turning aside, so clear was the road left for him, he passed from the Baroness to Eugenie, whom he complimented in such rapid and measured terms that the proud artist was quite struck. Near her was Mademoiselle Louise d'Armilly, who thanked the Count for the letters of introduction he had so kindly given her for Italy, which she intended immediately to make use of. On leaving these ladies, he found himself with Danglars, who had advanced to meet him. Having accomplished these 3 social duties, Monte Cristo stopped, looking around him with that expression peculiar to a certain class, which seems to say, "I have done my duty, now let others do theirs." Andrea, who was in an adjoining room, had shared in the sensation caused by the arrival of Monte Cristo, and now came forward to pay his respects to the Count. He found him completely surrounded. All were eager to speak to him, as is always the case with those whose words are few and weighty. The solicitors arrived at this moment and arranged their scrawled papers on the velvet cloth embroidered with gold, which covered the table prepared for the signature. It was a gilt table supported on lions' claws. One of the notaries sat down, and the other remained standing. They were about to proceed to the reading of the contract, which half Paris assembled was to sign. All took their places, or rather, the ladies formed a circle, while the gentlemen, more indifferent to the restraints of what Boileau calls the style énergétique, commented on the feverish agitation of Andrea, on Monsieur Danglars' riveted attention, Eugenie's composure, and the light and sprightly manner in which the Baroness treated this important affair. The contract was read during a profound silence, but as soon as it was finished, the buzz was redoubled through all the drawing-rooms. The brilliant sums, the rolling millions which were to be at the command of the 2 young people, and which crowned the display of the wedding presents and the young lady's diamonds, which had been made in a room entirely appropriated for that purpose, had exercised to the full their delusions over the envious assembly. Mademoiselle Danglars' charms were heightened in the opinion of the young men, and for the moment seemed to outvie the sun in splendor. As for the ladies, it is needless to say that while they coveted the millions, and they thought they did not need them for themselves, as they were beautiful enough without them. Andrea, surrounded by his friends, complimented, flattered, beginning to believe in the reality of his dream, was almost bewildered. The notary solemnly took the pen, flourished it above his head, and said, "Gentlemen, we are about to sign the contract." The Baron was to sign first, then the representative of Monsieur Cavalcanti, Sr., then the Baroness, afterwards the future couple, as they are styled in the abominable phraseology of legal documents. The Baron took the pen and signed, then the representative. The Baroness approached, leaning on Madame de Villefort's arm. "My dear," said she as she took the pen, "is it not vexatious? an unexpected incident in the affair of murder and theft at the Count of Monte Cristo's, in which he nearly fell a victim, deprives us of the pleasure of seeing Monsieur de Villefort." "Indeed," said Monsieur Danglars, in the same tone in which he would have said, "Oh, well, what do I care?" "As a matter of fact," said Monte Cristo, approaching, "I am much afraid that I am the involuntary cause of his absence." "What, you, Count?" said Madame Danglars, signing. "If you are, take care, for I shall never forgive you." Andrea pricked up his ears. "But it is not my fault, as I shall endeavor to prove." Everyone listened eagerly. Monte Cristo, who so rarely opened his lips, was about to speak. "You remember," said the Count, during the most profound silence, "that the unhappy wretch who came to rob me died at my house. The supposition is that he was stabbed by his accomplice on attempting to leave it." "Yes," said Danglars. "In order that his wounds might be examined, he was undressed, and his clothes were thrown into a corner, where the police picked them up, with the exception of the waistcoat, which they overlooked." Andrea turned pale and drew towards the door. He saw a cloud rising in the horizon, which appeared to forebode a coming storm. "Well, this waistcoat was discovered today, covered with blood, and with a hole over the heart. The ladies screamed, and 2 or 3 prepared to faint. It was brought to me. No one could guess what the dirty rag could be. I alone suspected that it was the waistcoat of the murdered man. My valet, in examining this mournful relic, felt a paper in the pocket and drew it out. It was a letter addressed to you, Baron." "To me?" cried Danglars. "Yes, indeed, to you. I succeeded in deciphering your name under the blood with which the letter was stained," replied Monte Cristo, amid the general outburst of amazement. "But," asked Madame Danglars, looking at her husband with uneasiness, "how could that prevent Monsieur de Villefort—" "In this simple way, madame," replied Monte Cristo. "The waistcoat and the letter were both what is termed circumstantial evidence. I therefore sent them to the king's attorney. You understand, my dearest Baron, that legal methods are the safest in criminal cases. It was perhaps some plot against you." Andrea looked steadily at Monte Cristo and disappeared in the second drawing-room. "Possibly," said Danglars. "Was not this murdered man some old galley slave?" "Yes," replied the Count. "A felon named Caderousse." Danglars turned slightly pale. Andrea reached the anteroom beyond the little drawing-room. "But go on signing," said Monte Cristo. "I perceive that my story has caused a general emotion, and I beg to apologize to you, Baroness, and to Mademoiselle Danglars." The Baroness, who had signed, returned the pen to the notary. "Prince Cavalcanti," said the latter. "Prince Cavalcanti, where are you?" "Andrea! Andrea!" repeated several young people, who were already on sufficiently intimate terms with him to call him by his Christian name. "Call the prince. Inform him that it is his turn to sign," said Danglars to one of the floor-keepers. But at the same instant, the crowd of guests rushed in alarm into the principal salon, as if some frightful monster had entered the apartments, quorens quem deveret. There was indeed reason to retreat, to be alarmed, and to scream. An officer was placing 2 soldiers at the door of each drawing-room, and was advancing towards Danglars, preceded by a commissary of police, girded with his scarf. Madame Danglars uttered a scream and fainted. Danglars, who thought himself threatened, certain consciences are never calm, Danglars, even before his guests, showed a countenance of abject terror. "What's the matter, sir?" asked Monte Cristo, advancing to meet the commissioner. "Which of you gentlemen," asked the magistrate, without replying to the Count, "answers to the name of Andrea Cavalcanti?" A cry of astonishment was heard from all parts of the room. They searched, they questioned. "But who then is Andrea Cavalcanti?" asked Danglars in amazement. "A galley slave, escaped from confinement at Toulon." "And what crime has he committed?" "He is accused," said the commissary with his inflexible voice, "of having assassinated the man named Caderousse, his former companion in prison, at the moment he was making his escape from the house of the Count of Monte Cristo." Monte Cristo cast a rapid glance around him. Andrea was gone. End of chapter 96. Chapter 97. The Departure for Belgium. A few minutes after the scene of confusion produced in the salon of Monsieur Danglars by the unexpected appearance of the brigade of soldiers, and by the disclosure which had followed, the mansion was deserted with as much rapidity as if a case of plague or of cholera morbus had broken out among the guests. In a few minutes, through all the doors, down all the staircases, by every exit, everyone hastened to retire, or rather, to fly. For it was a situation where the ordinary condolences, which even the best friends are so eager to offer in great catastrophes, were seen to be utterly futile. There remained in the banker's house only Danglars, closeted in his study, and making his statement to the officer of gendarmes. Madame Danglars, terrified, was in the boudoir with which we are acquainted. Eugenie, who, with a haughty air and disdainful lip, had retired to her room with her inseparable companion, Mademoiselle Louise d'Armilly. As for the numerous servants, more numerous that evening than usual, for their number was augmented by cooks and butlers from the Café de Paris, venting on their employers their anger at what they termed the insult to which they had been subjected, they collected in groups in the hall, in the kitchens, or in their rooms, thinking very little of their duty, which was thus naturally interrupted. Of all this household, only 2 persons deserve our notice. These are Mademoiselle Eugenie Danglars and Mademoiselle Louise d'Armilly. The betrothed had retired, as we said, with haughty air, disdainful lip, and the demeanor of an outraged queen, followed by her companion, who was paler and more disturbed than herself. On reaching her room, Eugenie locked her door, while Louise fell on a chair. "Oh, what a dreadful thing," said the young musician. "Who could have suspected it? Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti, a murderer, a galley slave escaped, a convict." An ironical smile curled the lip of Eugenie. "In truth, I was fated," said she. "I escaped the Morcerf only to fall into the Cavalcanti." "Oh, do not confound the 2, Eugenie." "Hold your tongue. The men are all infamous, and I am happy to be able now to do more than detest them. I despise them." "What shall we do?" asked Louise. "What shall we do?" "Yes. Why, the same we had intended doing 3 days since. Set off." "What? Although you are not now going to be married, you intend still—" "Listen, Louise. I hate this life of the fashionable world, always ordered, measured, ruled, like our music paper. What I have always wished for, desired, and coveted is the life of an artist, free and independent, relying only on my own resources, and accountable only to myself. Remain here? What for? That they may try, a month hence, to marry me again, and to whom? Monsieur Debray, perhaps, as it was once proposed? No, Louise, no. This evening's adventure will serve for my excuse. I did not seek one. I did not ask for one. God sends me this, and I hail it joyfully." "How strong and courageous you are," said the frail, fair girl to her brunette companion. "Did you not yet know me? Come, Louise, let us talk of our affairs. The post-chaise was happily bought 3 days since. Have you had it sent where we are to go for it?" "Yes." "Our passport?" "Here it is." And Eugenie, with her usual precision, opened a printed paper and read, "Monsieur Léon d'Armilly, 20 years of age, profession artist, hair black, eyes black, traveling with his sister." "Capital. How did you get this passport?" "When I went to ask Monsieur de Monte Cristo for letters to the directors of the theaters at Rome and Naples, I expressed my fears of traveling as a woman. He perfectly understood them and undertook to procure for me a man's passport, and 2 days after I received this, to which I have added with my own hand, traveling with his sister." "Well," said Eugenie cheerfully, "we have then only to pack up our trunks. We shall start the evening of the signing of the contract instead of the evening of the wedding. That is all." "But consider the matter seriously, Eugenie." "Oh, I am done with considering. I am tired of hearing only of market reports, of the end of the month, of the rise and fall of Spanish funds, of Haitian bonds. Instead of that, Louise, do you understand? Air, liberty, melody of birds, plains of Lombardy, Venetian canals, Roman palaces, the Bay of Naples. How much have we, Louise?" The young girl to whom this question was addressed drew from an inlaid secretary a small portfolio with a lock, in which she counted 23 banknotes. 23,000 francs, said she. "And as much, at least, in pearls, diamonds, and jewels," said Eugenie.
We are rich. With 45,000 francs, we can live like princesses for 2 years and comfortably for 4. But before 6 months, you with your music and I with my voice, we shall double our capital. Come, you shall take charge of the money, I of the jewel box, so that if one of us has the misfortune to lose her treasure, the other would still have hers left. Now, the portmanteau. Let us make haste. The portmanteau.
Stop, said Louise, going to listen at Madame Danglars' door.
What do you fear? That we may be discovered. The door is locked. They may tell us to open it. They may if they like, but we will not. You are a perfect Amazon, Eugenie.
And the 2 young girls began to heap into a trunk all the things they thought they should require.
There now, said Eugenie. While I change my costume, you lock the portmanteau.
Louise pressed with all the strength of her little hands on the top of the portmanteau.
But I cannot, said she. I am not strong enough. You shut it. You do well to ask, said Eugenie, laughing. I forgot that I was Hercules, and you only the pale Omphale.
And the young girl, kneeling on the top, pressed the 2 parts of the portmanteau together, and Mademoiselle d'Armilly passed the bolt of a padlock through it. When this was done, Eugenie opened a drawer, of which she kept the key, and took from it a wadded violet silk traveling cloak.
Here, said she, you see I have thought of everything. With this cloak you will not be cold. But you? Oh, I am never cold, you know. Besides, with these men's clothes, will you dress here? Certainly. Shall you have time? Do not be uneasy, you little coward. All our servants are busy discussing the grand affair. Besides, what is there astonishing when you think of the grief I ought to be in, that I shut myself up? Tell me. No, truly, you comfort me. Come and help me.
From the same drawer she took a man's complete costume, from the boots to the coat, and a provision of linen, where there was nothing superfluous but every requisite. Then, with a promptitude which indicated that this was not the first time she had amused herself by adopting the garb of the opposite sex, Eugenie drew on the boots and pantaloons, tied her cravat, buttoned her waistcoat up to the throat, and put on a coat which admirably fitted her beautiful figure.
Oh, that is very good. Indeed, it is very good,
said Louise, looking at her with admiration.
But that beautiful black hair, those magnificent braids, which made all the ladies sigh with envy, will they go under a man's hat like the one I see down there? You shall see, said Eugenie.
And with her left hand seizing the thick mass, which her long fingers could scarcely grasp, she took in her right hand a pair of long scissors, and soon the steel met through the rich and splendid hair, which fell in a cluster at her feet as she leaned back to keep it from her coat. Then she grasped the front hair, which she also cut off, without expressing the least regret. On the contrary, her eyes sparkled with greater pleasure than usual under her ebony eyebrows.
Oh, the magnificent hair, said Louise with regret. And am I not 100 times better thus?
Cried Eugenie, smoothing the scattered curls of her hair, which had now quite a masculine appearance.
And do you not think me handsomer so? Oh, you are beautiful, always beautiful, cried Louise. Now, where are you going? To Brussels, if you like. It is the nearest frontier. We can go to Brussels, Liège, La Chapelle, then up the Rhine to Strasbourg. We will cross Switzerland and go down into Italy by the St. Gothard. Will that do? Yes. What are you looking at? I am looking at you. Indeed, you are adorable like that. One would say you were carrying me off. And they would be right, pardieu. Oh, I think you swore, Eugenie.
And the 2 young girls, whom everyone might have thought plunged in grief, the one on her own account, the other from interest in her friend, burst out laughing as they cleared away every visible trace of the disorder which had naturally accompanied the preparations for their escape. Then, having blown out the lights, the 2 fugitives, looking and listening eagerly, with outstretched necks, opened the door of a dressing-room which led by a side staircase down to the yard, Eugenie going first, and holding with one arm the portmanteau, which by the opposite handle Mademoiselle d'Armilly scarcely raised with both hands. The yard was empty. The clock was striking 12. The porter had not yet gone to bed. Eugenie approached softly and saw the old man sleeping soundly in an armchair in his lodge. She returned to Louise, took up the portmanteau, which she had placed for a moment on the ground,
and they reached the archway under the shadow of the wall. Eugenie concealed Louise in an angle of the gateway, so that if the porter chanced to awake, he might see but one person. Then, placing herself in the full light of the lamp which lit the yard, "Gate!" cried she, with her finest contralto voice and rapping at the window. The porter got up as Eugenie expected, and even advanced some steps to recognize the person who was going out, but, seeing a young man striking his boot impatiently with his riding whip, he opened it immediately. Louise slid through the half-open gate like a snake and bounded lightly forward. Eugenie, apparently calm, although in all probability her heart beat somewhat faster than usual, went out in her turn. A porter was passing, and they gave him the portmanteau. Then the two young girls, having told him to take it to number 36, Rue de la Victoire, walked behind this man, whose presence comforted Louise. As for Eugenie, she was as strong as a Judith or a Delilah. They arrived at the appointed spot. Eugenie ordered the porter to put down the portmanteau, gave him some pieces of money, and having rapped at the shutter, sent him away. The shutter where Eugenie had rapped was that of a little laundress, who had been previously warned and was not yet gone to bed. She opened the door. "Mademoiselle," said Eugenie, "let the porter get the post-chaise from the coach-house and fetch some post-horses from the hotel. Here are 5 francs for his trouble." "Indeed," said Louise, "I admire you, and I could almost say respect you." The laundress looked on in astonishment, but as she had been promised 20 louis, she made no remark. In a quarter of an hour the porter returned with a post-boy and horses, which were harnessed and put in the post-chaise in a minute, while the porter fastened the portmanteau on with the assistance of a cord and strap. "Here is the passport," said the postilion. "Which way are we going, young gentleman?" "To Fontainebleau," replied Eugenie with an almost masculine voice. "What do you say?" said Louise. "I am giving them the slip," said Eugenie. "This woman to whom we have given 20 louis may betray us for 40. We will soon alter our direction." And the young girl jumped into the britska, which was admirably arranged for sleeping in, without scarcely touching the step. "You are always right," said the music teacher, seating herself by the side of her friend. A quarter of an hour afterwards, the postilion, having been put in the right road, passed with a crack of his whip through the gateway of the Barrière Saint-Martin. "Ah," said Louise, breathing freely, "here we are out of Paris." "Yes, my dear, the abduction is an accomplished fact," replied Eugenie. "Yes, and without violence," said Louise. "I shall bring that forward as an extenuating circumstance," replied Eugenie. These words were lost in the noise which the carriage made in rolling over the pavement of La Villette. Monsieur Danglars no longer had a daughter. End of chapter 97.
And cut. That's a wrap, folks. Thanks for listening to today's episode of I've Been Meaning to Read That, with me, your host, Dan. If you want to learn more about the show, you can follow us on Instagram at Meaning to Read and TikTok at I've Been Meaning. If you want to support the show to help keep it going, you can find me on Venmo at Dingus Donut, DINGUSDONUT. Supporters get a shout out on the show, and even more important, get to vote on the next book that we read. No matter what, I'll see you for our next episode. Until then, read those books you've been meaning to read, and have a lovely, lovely day.